There we go. Welcome to the Nostr Asia Hackathon that we're hosting here at Bolt Fun. How are you? Thank you so much for joining us.
Doing great.
Yep.
Well, everybody's asking about money, money, money. Can we make money on Nostr? And so we had Max Webster 2 days ago who gave us the VC side, and we're really thankful and happy to have you two who've been working as devs for a very long time and have gone down the Nostr rabbit hole. So we'd love it if you could just tell us about yourself, a little bit about the projects you're working on before we can go into the presentation, if possible. Jeff?
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Jeff. I have been building on the internet for, I don't know, 20 years or something. I fell into a deep rabbit hole with kind of working at startups after doing kind of web apps and iOS apps for a couple of years, and spent the last sort of 10 years working in a bunch of high growth startups. I found Nostr at the beginning of this year and kind of went full time on it fully, like in February. I just kind of saw it and saw the amazing possibilities that, you know, it gives you for rebuilding the internet, and, you know, went all in on it straight away. So I've been thinking about this topic for basically since that, you know, early days in February, and trying to figure out exactly like, you know, how do you build businesses? What types of businesses? How do they look different than what we've seen in the kind of traditional tech world?
Yeah, I'm G. I've been building software and hardware for also around 20 years or so. Got into Nostr like a bit over a year and a half ago, and yeah, it just hit me like pretty quickly, like mostly because of the community, but also at that stage it was more like, now it's quite social, but back then it was like mostly a technical thing. And the thing that really got me interested in it was that it's like a peer-to-peer network, but you don't need to have a direct connection to your peers, and you also don't need to have a synchronous connection. So you don't need to be connected at the same time, which is like a huge, it opens up so many possibilities. And yeah, nostrocket and the Nostrovia podcast.
And you were like super early, like 20 users, 50 users on the Telegram first.
Yeah, like there were like I can't remember how many. There were quite a number of users on the Telegram group. There were only like maybe like a few active users. Or yeah, Telegram group was where it all happened, because Nostr was not really usable back then. Yeah.
Arguably,
Yeah,
we're still kind of halfway there.
Oh, it's really good now compared. Like then it was like you wouldn't use it for, like, none of the Nostr developers were using it for a discussion about Nostr back then. It was just like not workable.
So Jeff, I wanted to ask you, I know you've taken VC money before, so I already know the other side of like, what does it mean to ask for VC money? So we're here for the other side, for how can you monetize, how can you make this, because it is a huge responsibility to take money and to try to build in that route. So I'd like to have you start us with the monetization presentation, and just we can get the ball rolling. I have GSovereignty here. G, comment as well on I'm gonna go under so that you can add your presentation to the stage. Okay.
Sure. Sounds good. So I guess just to kick it off, yeah, you're totally right. I have been kind of on both sides of the coin. Early on, I worked in sort of a consulting style business where I was building web apps and iOS apps for clients kind of in a freelance capacity. When I joined the kind of tech startup world, obviously most of that is VC funded. And, you know, it was a bit of like the golden age of VC in kind of the early 2010s. You know, money sort of didn't quite rain from the sky like it did at the end of the 2010s and early 2020s, but it was definitely not, it wasn't ridiculously difficult to get VC money. And so, but like you said, that comes with a lot of strings attached. VCs are looking for very outsized returns. You know, Max's, I guess, show with you guys the other day kind of highlighted that. Like, he's looking for businesses that can become huge, and it's totally fine for VCs to strike out on, you know, a good number of their investments. They just need one or two to become absolutely massive so that they can return their fund. So I think more over time, I've become, I guess I've always been interested in it, but I've become much more interested in sort of how can you bring the internet back to a place where you can monetize and start small and medium-sized businesses that, they're sort of talked about in some circles as like lifestyle businesses. But when you think about it, like a lifestyle business is just what business was, until VC money showed up a couple of decades ago. So I think like that's there's nothing to be like scoffed at there. I think building a business that creates profit and, has a SATS flow that, is paying you on a regular basis is an incredible achievement. And at the moment, that's what excites me a lot more than, going out and trying to find some more VC money. So I guess, unless you want to jump in, G, on anything, I'll just like run through the slides. Like this is pretty basic. I wanted to put together a few things, pretty like, again, pretty basic in the sense that I didn't want to assume that anybody knew about kind of the topic of monetization and the different things that have been tried in the past and what has worked and what hasn't. So I'll run through this, obviously drop comments or questions in the chat if there's any, and I will cover that stuff when we get there. So talking about monetizing Nostr apps, this is funny. G and Pablo and I have a Telegram group that's just the three of us, and it's mostly just trolling each other relentlessly. And as Pablo just said, monetization is not possible in Nostr, and he told us this morning that the only slide we needed was this one, which he's just jumped in on the chat with, which I think is sort of true. I also, it's not technically true that he says it's not possible. He really said it wasn't possible yet to monetize on Nostr. And
there he is. He showed up.
Exactly. So I don't know that this is 100% true. I do think it is possible to monetize. I don't know that it's possible to pay yourself a full-time salary out of a Nostr app yet. But I don't think we're too far off from somebody cracking that egg and like figuring out how to make that work. And I think it's less about the techniques of monetization and much more about what the product or service it is that you're offering. And so we'll get to that in a little bit. So just, I guess, real quick, this is what we'll very quickly go through here. So what is monetization? What do we mean by it? Does freedom tech have to be free? I think this is one that a lot of devs, especially in the open source space, trip on every now and then. We'll run through a few of the kind of classic business models that are out there and like ways that people charge for products. We'll go through just a couple of like very high level key concepts that I think are important no matter whether you're building on Nostr or elsewhere. And then sort of wrap it all up by kind of applying this stuff very specifically to Nostr apps and like what's different in the Nostr space. So if we start with what is monetization, monetization is just simply revenue. It's like, how are you going to make money? And there are tons of different ways to monetize a product or service. I guess that's the most basic way to think about this. One important, I guess, and some examples of that are like subscriptions, one-off purchases, licensing, ads. There's like all sorts of different ways you can charge money. I think we're very used to things like subscriptions. Over the last 10 years, that's become the dominant online kind of billing model. But there's a lot of different ways to do it. Monetization isn't a lot of things, though. Just because you get money in doesn't mean it's monetization. So like, we were just talking about a minute ago, VC or other funding, that's not monetization. That is effectively, funding to build something in advance in exchange for some sort of control, whether that's financial control or, control over your board, that sort of thing. It's also not grants. So things like OpenSats or, HRF grants or, bounties, that's not monetization either. That's quite a different realm of, ways to get paid and ways to fund yourself. And it's definitely not bank loans. Going into debt to build things is like not what we're talking about here. I would actually, we've touched on it already, but like I would very much recommend folks that are interested in, trying to find funds, especially from kind of a VC point of view. And yeah, exactly, Pablo, it's fiat monetization. But yeah, if you are looking for like VC funding in specific, definitely go and watch the chat with Max Webster that you guys had the other day. I watched through it today and it was great. And another thing, I love to, shill OpenSats as much as possible. It's an incredible program. I'm on an OpenSats grant, which is why I'm able to continue building, full time and sort of exploring and experimenting without having to, panic about how I'm gonna, pay for my house and food and all the rest. So if you have an idea, if you're building anything that is related to Bitcoin, Lightning, Nostr, please go and, submit a grant proposal.
I agree.
Okay.
Panic is the right word.
Yeah, exactly. It becomes panic after a while, right? At the beginning, it's just worry, and then it becomes
Like,
panic
oh.
eventually. Right. Okay, cool. So let's kind of quickly touch on, like, does Freedom Tech have to be free? And I think, FOSS, free and open source software is, it's a really big kind of name in the space. It's like what I think a lot of people want to be working on. There's both kind of there's like a desire to build something that, matters, that changes the world, that helps people. And that doesn't always come with the idea of like, I want to become rich from this thing as well. And isn't it against the ethos of freedom to charge for freedom tech? Like, if you think about, like, you're building tools for people that are going to empower people to become more free in their lives and potentially in situations that are pretty dire under, authoritarian regimes, you almost feel bad about charging money for those sorts of things. And so that's another thing that you often kind of hear is like pushback against, charging money for the things that you build. And the last one that I love is like my personal favorite is I don't want to sell out. Like when people say that to me, I'm just like, all right, that's it. We need to talk about a few things. Because, I think a lot of people look at, and especially, this happens with devs all the time. They're like, oh, I just built this little tool and it was like really easy for me to build, but they don't kind of realize like there's a giant gap between the stuff that feels easy to them and what is possible for, normal people that don't build software to do. And
Making
so
money isn't a bad word. I mean, sometimes people who say, I don't want to sell out, is that considered potentially privilege? Like you come at it from a point of view where you have money, so therefore anybody who wants to make money are evil?
Yeah, I've never actually thought about it that way, but that actually is a really good way to think about it. Because that is something, I mean, I'm American. That is something you definitely hear, a lot in America is like this fear of selling out and, doing stuff for the man. But yeah, it's an interesting way to think about it for sure. And I guess, my pushback here is monetization is actually about freedom. Sustainable businesses are always the goal. And being able to build something that is self-supporting, that can, obviously sustain the costs that it incurs, but also pay the people that work on it, means that it can go on forever and ever into the future. And, things like OpenSats grants are great for sort of bootstrapping, especially in areas that are super, super new. But I think it's also, it's not something you can just count on forever. Yes, you are correct. I mean, I think freedom doesn't always mean free of cost, but there'll always be people trying to run open relays. I mean, I think that's totally correct. And, I'm not saying that every single project has to charge money by any stretch. I just think that if you aren't charging money, you are definitely limiting the possibility of kind of what you can achieve or what you can make happen. I love Pablo's point here: no margin, no mission. I think that's actually a good thing. Okay, so let's look at these again real fast. Free and open source software, like we just talked about, like just because the underlying software is being given away for free doesn't mean you can't figure out a way to charge for it or around it. And we'll talk about one of the business models in specific that supports this. Isn't it against the ethos of freedom to charge for freedom tech? Well, no, because if you want to serve, if you want to help more and more people to achieve more freedom in their lives, you need to be able to make sure that you exist for, a long period of time and that you can actually achieve your goals. And so what better way to do that than to be the master of your own, kind of mission and actually have enough money coming in that you can cover yourself.
And also it's an economic battle. So like if we don't make money, then that's how we die.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's also one really interesting thing here as well, which is, money is like money and prices are the signal in free markets, and so you can't really have a properly functioning free market without some signal of what something is worth to people. Yeah, exactly. And so when you give something away for free, you're already sort of hamstringing yourself in terms of the feedback you get from customers, the type of people that are trying to use your product. You end up in a situation where it's much more difficult to actually understand, is your product valuable to anybody or not? Cool. Okay, so let's go to the kind of a crash course through a bunch of different business models that I've seen, and I'm definitely not going to cover everything that's out there. This is just some of the major ones that I think everybody should be aware of. So I guess top of the heap, and the one that kind of comes to mind quickest, is sort of selling, physical or digital products. Like, this is one of the oldest models in existence. You have something, you sell it for money. Most of the things that we buy on a regular basis, food, gas, books, things like that, those are examples of physical or digital products that we buy. Some of the not great things about this sort of model is that it's much less predictable from an income stream, and it's totally tied to supply and demand. You can be in a situation that's great and you have lots of demand and and you've got enough supply of whatever it is you're trying to sell, but having not enough demand is a problem, and having not enough supply is also a problem in this scenario. So there's a lot of factors there that you're trying to balance. You're also dealing with atoms in the real world in most cases. Now, there's digital products here as well, but in a lot of cases here, you've got a lot of other kind of logistics to handle.
Wait, what is atoms? Sorry.
Like
Atoms in the
atoms,
world?
like
hydrogen
atoms, carbon atoms,
Ah,
things.
atoms.
Yeah,
Okay.
atoms. Yeah, ATOMS, not atom. Okay, so the next model is just fee for a service. Again, this is has been around since the beginning of time, basically. All the standard lawyers, banks, credit cards, exchanges, custodial wallets, like all of these things charge a fee for a service that they provide. Again, it's sort of tied to demand and ability to service requests. So there is kind of a in a lot of types of these businesses, there is sort of a connection here where you get into a situation where even if you're wildly successful, it's actually hard to service all of the requests because you might be limited by your time. But this is still, a very valid business model, especially when it's, powered by software, and works really well with sort of financial services where there's like a high frequency of transactions that are happening. So, works great for credit cards, works great for custodial, wallets or exchanges, things like that. Probably the most popular over the last 20 years, though, has been, something as a service. And this is most often referred to as SaaS, software as a service. And this is the idea that you're charging on a recurring basis for access to your product or service. This is most of the super successful internet businesses over the last 15 years. Salesforce was one of the first that kind of pioneered this model of you're not buying a box with, disks of software. And like their original thing was, they're like that a logo with like no software, or like, we're not doing software. But there's also consumer subscription models like Netflix, Amazon Prime. Like, we know all these businesses because, this is what we've had for the last 20 years or so. These are also really, really great businesses from a point of view of predictability. Once you get them up and running, they have very predictable revenue month to month. They have very predictable, growth and contraction rates. And so you can, very easily predict out, like over, the course of, many months into the future, what your business is going to look like. And that gives you a lot of flexibility that a lot of other business types don't have. Yes, this is exactly right, Pablo. You'll own nothing and be happy of software, which in some ways is kind of good, right? Because there's plenty of software you don't want to own and maintain and update and deal with. A lot of times you just want access to be able to use something, and that's totally fine. Like, I don't want to have to run a bunch of movie servers in my house. Of course I could. I'd rather just pay Netflix and be able to open it up whatever I want. I think the other thing that's really...
they need
go ahead, G.
Sorry.
Go ahead,
they need to keep delivering. Like, if you're providing a software as a service and you stop delivering, then like that, the money, no one's going to keep paying you, right? So yeah, I think
Right.
I mean, they are giving a service. Like, it feels like you own it, right? Like, I feel like I own my Spotify. I feel like I own my Netflix. So I do think that in that sense, they are kind of personalizing it compared to other projects. But yeah, you don't own it, but you feel like you own it.
You feel like you own it until you stop paying, and then they
Until you
take it
stop
away.
paying. That's true.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think there's pluses and minuses to all this, right? For most users of the internet, like they're not going to do the work of running their own services and things like that. And so products like this are perfect. That said, there's like definitely a dark side where, once you've got a customer in, you can lock them into the product by not giving them their data back or, doing lots of bad things. But I think the main thing to understand that like when we're talking about this as a business model, it's, very predictable and great in that regard. And there's many, many different ways to sort of tweak and fine tune, the packaging, the pricing around subscriptions to make sure that you can service different users at different levels and that sort of thing. One of the ones that I'm actually most interested in and have been for years is sort of this open source plus services model. And this actually works really, really well with open source and like free technologies. And especially, for freedom software where you want the ability for people to be able to run it on their own. This is a perfect model because, and to be honest, this has built some absolutely massive businesses as well. Elastic, MongoDB, those are like massive companies. And they effectively are giving their core product away for free for people that, have the ability to and want to, run and manage the system themselves. And so the idea here is obviously, the core product is free and open source. And then either customers that are paying, they're paying for you to host it for them and manage it for them, or they're paying for services around the edges where, it's like support or, things like that. This works incredibly well with complex infrastructure stuff, like databases, data pipelines and things like that. Makes perfect sense. This is also can be made very predictable because you can sort of pair this with a software as a service model. And I guess an added benefit is that because it's open source at its core, you do benefit from getting, community contributions back to the core products. And you get to sleep well at night because, anybody can use your product if they want to, and they've got the skills, and you're not blocking them, and keeping your whole entire tech stack closed source. And I guess there's a few here at the end that we'll barely touch on. Licensing is sort of an old school version of selling software. Licensing is the classic, you're going to buy a disk and you're going to license the software from Oracle or Microsoft or something like that. You can also, license things like Shazam is like their business basically still exists because other apps are licensing their technology and then using that technology in their apps. And so it's a bit of an outdated model, in my opinion. Probably not a lot of things that, we're going to do with that in the Nostr world. That said, who knows? Maybe Pablo decides the data vending machines have to be licensed through him or something. So licensing is something to be aware of, but I doubt it's going to really play into a lot of stuff here. And the last one is the most, I guess, controversial of all, which is advertising. Obviously, it's built the largest businesses maybe in the world ever. It's extremely profitable, provided you are enormous and you have a captive user base. But it's really poorly aligned incentives between the users and your actual business objectives. And so I think everybody that's on Nostr now will get this immediately. Like, advertisements is a potentially really dangerous place to be in. Now, I think there are some really interesting experiments happening around advertising and like how do we do advertising in a different way, but we'll talk about those in a second. And then the last thing I just want to mention is like sponsorships is actually a totally reasonable way to fund kind of early development of products. You can find one or two advertisers or sponsors that will happily pay for space in your app or pay to have sort of association to your app, especially if it's something that is, really well regarded in the community. So I think, when you think about advertising, like don't forget that there is this like super small version that can also be done that can work really, really well, even at slightly larger, amounts of revenue. If you think about it, most major sporting events and, around the world sailboat races and things like that are done completely on a sponsorship basis.
Well, Boat Fun does that. Nostrovia does or no, G?
No.
No sponsorship.
No, and no sponsorship.
Boat Fun
No
does
advertising.
it a little bit differently.
That's something like Jeff is more familiar with, I think, doing like advertising.
I mean, a little bit. I've never run anything, advertising, and I've never been like part of advertising business models or anything. But I do think like, podcasts, obviously there's a lot of podcasts out there that take sponsorship money, and I think that's a great way to keep them running. So it just depends. It's all advertising, but, no matter what name you put on it, but it's, there are different ways of doing it that can work better or worse depending on the situation.
But it's also like, essentially you're selling the user base, like you're selling the user base's attention. So that's like, not, that's what it really comes, I mean, that's what it really comes down to, right? Is there any other way to look at it?
I mean,
I differ because I come from the public policy space, and I think it depends on who you align with, who your sponsor is. As long as they stay out of the way and are understanding that the goal is X, Y, Z, and they're not pushing or trying to get into the space, then I think you have a pretty good, more like a partnership versus a sponsorship. And it's just who you choose as a sponsor or partner.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that I would also kind of second that. I think there's ways to do sponsorship that align way better. And like, yes, you are selling the attention of your users or your customers or whatever you want to call them. I do think that it's, again, like with sponsorship, you have much better control over that. And usually sponsorship sort of doesn't make sense once you become large. And so like Google could never go to a sponsorship model, right? Like they need too much money. And so the only way to do that is to, use the, captive feature of their audience and, exploit them as much as possible. Okay, so let's do a couple like quick key concept things, and like these are not necessarily specifically about monetization, but are sort of around the edges of it, and like they're things that we'll cover quickly here, but like are worth thinking about a little bit more deeply because the ramifications of a few of these things make a huge difference over the big picture. Marginal cost of production. This is something that Jeff Booth talks about all the time, but it's something that everybody that has worked in the internet knows. Software ate the world because there is, this idea that the marginal cost of production for software is basically zero. So you think about it, like what's the cost to produce the next unit of your product or service is what we're talking about here. So in a services business, that's like the next hour of your time. And that's always going to cost you 1 hour, no matter what. You've only got a certain number of hours in the day that you can spend on working. And the marginal cost for services businesses often fall into this category. Even if you're producing physical products, you've got, a fixed cost in design and setup, and then you've got this variable cost in materials and labor to produce these things. However, software costs almost nothing. You put in a lot of time and energy and effort up front. And so there's this big fixed cost, and there is an ongoing cost in terms of, running the service and supporting the service. But the next user that starts using your software has an almost, negligible cost, especially once you get to large numbers of users. It's basically zero. And the important thing, to keep in mind here is that, the improvement of technology over time will always drive the marginal cost of production to zero. This is just kind of a law of nature that sort of, is flummoxing most of the fiat world right now because, they can't, function with the idea that prices and costs should go down rather than up over time. But this is a really, really important part, especially about software. Pricing and packaging. If you've worked in a tech business, you've probably heard this phrase, pricing and packaging. It's some team that works with sales, and they're ostensibly a product team, but they don't really feel like a product team for most intents. Pricing and packaging basically just refers to like how do you slice up who you're charging and what what you're charging them for. And so it's a really important thing to keep in mind that pricing and packaging is not fixed. You should be experimenting a lot with how much you're charging people for your product or the different ways that you charge them for your product. So like even in SaaS businesses, this is something that a lot of people have trouble experimenting with, but it's probably the thing that you have control over that can have the most impact on profitability of a business. Like a quick example, one of the companies that I worked for a while, we had like 47 different pricing models running at one time. And it was super difficult to keep track of everything. But the net result was that like we very quickly realized that like, we, by changing up just how we charged and who we charged for what, we could basically like double our revenue with almost no extra work. So like working on those sorts of experiments actually, you know, should be treated as like a part of the work. You know, you build software, but you've also got to figure out how to, you know, get that software out into the world and make money off of it.
Wait, is that like when, for example, I see on my Amazon that it costs $55 and another person sees on their site that it costs $75? Is that what you mean by different pricing or what?
So usually
Because that's
with
algorithmic.
yeah, usually those things are slightly different. So I mean, that's a version of it, but that's like algorithmic pricing that's slightly different. The way I think about this is mostly with pricing and packaging, you're talking about like SaaS products. And this is, you know, packaging is like, okay, what features are in the pro tier versus the free tier or the, you know, whatever middle of the road tier? What are the prices for our different tiers? Do we have add-ons that go on top of tiers? Like, could you buy extra stuff on top of that? Or is it, you know, like everything gets bundled into one thing? And so to me, it's more, you know, especially with the subscription version, where you start to get a lot of leeway in doing some of this experimentation. But I mean, to that end, like, you know, the algorithmic pricing definitely is a version of this. Yeah, like I think, you know, Gorilla's got a point here about like pay as you go is one of the best options when we talk about social networking platforms. We'll get to like how does this apply to Nostr in a second. And I'll come back to something there that I want to talk about. The last like little piece here is like distribution matters more than everything, like literally more than everything. You know, the saying is like first time founders focus on product and serial founders focus on distribution. This is exactly the reason that Microsoft can ship crap and still totally destroy the market, because they've just got like a built-in gigantic user base that when they say we've got this new thing, they're all just going to buy it. Startups don't really generally have distribution. They're brand new. And this is actually why, you know, Nostr is so amazing. You know, thinking about how you get distribution is actually way more important than thinking about how to get monetization right in the beginning. And because Nostr gives you sort of a built-in network effect of the entire protocol on day one for your product, it actually makes it much, much easier to get new products off the ground, or at least get them in front of enough people that you can understand whether this product is actually valuable or not. Because for all startups, that's pretty much the goal, right? Like figure out, do people even want this and will they pay me something for it? And once you understand those things, then it becomes, you know, a race of like, okay, which things do I want to do for them? How am I going to do them? And like, how much can I charge for them? But getting to that first sort of like product market fit question, really comes down to like, I've got to get it in front of enough people. And that's where having the kind of built-in network effect of Nostr and having every single Nostr user able to use your product with a single click, really makes a big difference. Okay, now we're at the last little bit. So there's a bunch of speculation on the effects of open networks, that, you know, I've been thinking about a bunch, and a lot of other people think about this as well. You know, Max even mentioned this in the VC kind of chat the other day. You know, I believe, as well as what he said, was like, you know, Nostr and Bitcoin both disintermediate a lot of traditional businesses. There's less middlemen, there's less regulatory capture. It simplifies a lot of things that have been built up over many decades in the past. Because your identity and your data are portable, there is no lock-in. And so that like knocks out an entire class of really crappy businesses like ISPs and telecom providers and things like that, right? If you can literally just pick up all your stuff and walk away, you know, that really changes the game on how businesses have to compete. I think this is also really powerful, but, you know, when you're talking about an open network, value accrues to the entire network and all of the businesses built on the network, rather than just a single business who's capturing the entire network. You know, Facebook is so incredibly valuable because they captured, you know, most of the planet, and they've sort of locked those people into their closed network because they can't really take their data. They can't really take their social graph. And so, you know, now they're in a point where they've got total, you know, exploitative power over those users. And to me, this basically leads to many more small and medium-sized businesses instead of these monopolistic giants. And I think that's a really, really great outcome. You know, like
No more fangs, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll still have really big businesses, but they're going to compete on different things, right? Like to me, I think that brand and user experience are going to be the things that that businesses have to compete on in this open network future. Like if we get this right, and the whole world is using Nostr as the internet, and all the services out there are built on top of it. Like if you can't lock people in and you can't exploit them for very long, at least, like what do you have left? You've only got, things like I have a really great user experience, or I have really great support, or, my brand is really well trusted for all sorts of reasons. Um, and so, this is obviously a really great thing, but it means that, teams and companies will have to focus on slightly different things. And by no means is this definitely true. I just like, this is how I, kind of look at the potential future here.
I just saw in the comments, I don't know who's using the Bolt Fund account, but first to market is less important than first to articulate, which is such an awesome point. Oh, it's
That's
you.
Yes.
not
Okay.
mine.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really important point. Yep.
And the other thing in the comments that I just saw is Pablo said that we are WEF shields. I just want to point out that's only Jeff, not me.
I do.
Wes,
I mean, I do live pretty close to Davos, so I don't know if they're inviting me to their billionaire play thing.
I used to work with them all the time, so I know the world.
God, I don't know. I want to go and just laugh at them, but we'll leave the WEF aside for now. Okay, cool. And then I guess this is to point out the obvious. This is the first time we've had like a network native money. The internet didn't have native money. If you look back at the original, HTTP codes, 402 was the code for pay me. It obviously never got used, but now we can use it. And it's pretty amazing that we do have kind of a network native money to our open network. It's also never been true that you've been able to like stream value, right? Like the ability to send super, super small payments never made sense with credit cards and with traditional banks because the fees were too high. The actual transaction mess in the middle was so, gross that you couldn't just stream a couple cents at a time. Now with Lightning, it's super easy. And so I think we haven't really seen what that does to how businesses are made and like what businesses, what business models are used. And like to that point, to put a very explicit point on this, like, SaaS business models, subscription business models are fairly new. Like they really got popular in the last 20 years. And so the idea that, business models are sort of fixed is just not true. Like there will be new business models that come out of all of this kind of open network stuff that we're working on now. And I think our job right now is just to experiment, like try all sorts of things, try to apply, Bitcoin ethos, Nostr ethos to all of these business models and think about, what is the right way to charge for these different services, and see what works, because you've got like product market fit, but you've also got, sort of like packaging market fit, or like, market fit. Like it's basically how does your thing go to market and does that fit with what people want to do? And I imagine that like as these services get more popular, that's going to change completely. Okay, cool. A couple of quick experiments that just I'll mention very quickly. I know we're running through time here, but Zapvertising, that was kind of Walker and Carla did a whole bunch of stuff on that in the beginning. There was a couple of experiments there, but I haven't seen much of it since. I'd love to see more about this because I think it's really interesting. How could you make advertising more palatable, more aligned to users rather than just aligned to the businesses that capture that money? There's definitely options there. Mutiny just a couple of days ago actually came out with a blog post about like how they're doing subscriptions and how they're trying to make that possible for other businesses to use. I think that their article, I won't try to sum it up, just go read it, but like the idea of subscriptions with a Bitcoin ethos is actually really interesting. And I think they're playing around a lot with that. And then you've got things like Zap pools or prisms or splits. They're called lots of different things, but the idea basically is that you've got all this different ways of taking, payments value coming in and splitting them between a bunch of different parties. I know Pablo's here saying, check out Shipyard next year or next week.
Next year. Next year.
2 weeks, 2 weeks. No, next
Yeah.
week. He actually will ship next week though, G. But like I think there's interesting stuff there, right? Like being able to split value between the people that created content versus shared content. Like I think the new highlighter allows you to do. Those are really interesting things. And so there might be a lot of different models that we've not even touched on, not even explored, not even thought about yet. So again, like I would suggest everybody to like play with lots of different things, try lots of different stuff, but do actually value the work that you do and like, ask people for money. I think that's really important. Okay. And that's all for the things. So
G, do you have a few questions for him? Because I have a couple, but I wanted to give you.
No, that I don't have any questions. That was fantastic.
G, actually, one thing that you were talking about before with me, it was just like, is G gone?
We lost him. No, give it a second.
I'm still here.
There we go. We're back.
Okay. You're back. Just G, you were talking to me earlier today about like different licenses, like software licenses, and that just being like a point that can sort of impinge upon what people are allowed to do, like how they might monetize their products.
Well, it's more about like, because people think, especially in Nostr and in the Nostr community, people think like they don't need a license because they're just releasing it to the world and it's free for everyone, or they use like a BSD style license, which is the same thing really. But they don't think about like that means that I can come along and take that code and relicense it as whatever I want. So like that's what Apple did with FreeBSD. So then like if you build something, if you want it to remain, if you want the fruits of your labor to remain open for everyone, you need to license it in a way so that a corporate can't come along and take your code and then use the state to prevent you from using their improvements on that code.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that's a really important point. It's worth reading the details of the licenses. There are several licenses that are fully open and usable by anybody, but still have, kind of a commercial control, or, if you take this software, you are forced to, not commercialize it yourself, not closed source it afterwards. Pablo saying MIT plus CC. I think, there's a bunch of different ones that are similar to that, but like do properly look at the license and like choose it wisely. Don't just default to
if you want reciprocal arrangement, you want to use GPL or MPL, really.
Can you add it here, type it so that people can look for it later as well?
Yeah.
So like I have a question for G, like with podcasts, obviously the whole value for value model has been quite, loud as far as what can be done. But like, I wonder for how long can we get people to stay pressing, zapping or sending or staying engaged? Because even just with your regular likes or your regular zaps, people have lowered their intensity, would you say? So is there a way to keep that going?
I'd say it doesn't even, I mean, when it comes to doing a podcast or something like that, financially speaking, you're not going to
make any money.
You're not going to make any money. It's a loss, 100% loss, essentially. Unless you become really big, which,
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think there's plenty of podcasts that make a lot of money, but it's not.
I mean, if you get big enough,
from the zaps, zaps though.
From the zaps, no, that's not happening.
I mean, I have zapped the podcast, and I think it's kind of cool because it'll mark in the podcast trajectory like what points were extra popular or what comments were more important. I think that's really cool as far as content, but as far as making money, that's where I wonder and question.
I think you have to look at zaps as like a more like just an alternative
like a
to
regular
likes. Yeah.
Okay. And what about microtests? We did just now a Bolt Fun hackathon with AI, and so there was a bot that was doing microtests. So you could potentially pay people with Bitcoin, with sats, for microtasks with AI. That's a really different model that wasn't possible before, right?
Well, that's what the Pablo's DVM does essentially. Is that what you're are you saying like you're paying for AI to perform a task?
Yes. And
Yeah, so
people
that's what the DVMs
and also
do.
people that do the tasks, right? I imagine that there's also the other side where, you know, microtasks that people can, you can, you know, I don't know if it would be called,
But that's
like
pretty much the
income.
same as like, that's just a you know,
Mechanical type.
fee-based model. Yeah, it's like a
Got it.
fee-based model, right? You're just trading your time for a task that needs to be done. And so it kind of flips and goes, okay, that's a cost to the business, but you know, to that person, that's monetization of their time.
So you have to have a really good product or service. Thankfully, you have an entire ecosystem to be able to sell or tell their story or articulate what you have. So that's the great thing from before, right? Before it was either Amazon or Netflix who had the captive audience. Now Nostr is free. Everybody can, you can target practically anybody. That will be different. So do you think we're going to see smaller companies, still bigger companies? Like, what do you think as far as the monetization future?
I mean, my guess is that it's going to be smaller overall. I think the, you know, the average will definitely go down, and hopefully we won't have any of these full monopolies. That said, I think there'll still be absolutely massive businesses out there. You know, there's plenty of non-predatory, gigantic tech companies out there that do a really great job just by providing, you know, great service, great software to people. And so, you know, I think it's we will definitely still see those things, but I think having a very open network means that those businesses will necessarily have to, you know, compete and stay really competitive in the, you know, in user experience, supporting their users, servicing their users. Like, they just need to do a really, really good job. And so in theory, that competition should make everybody better.
Okay, I'm going to ask you, what are 3 products or services that you currently pay for in Nostr that you love and you like and you use and that you've paid for?
I mean, there's a bunch of relays that I pay for. So like nostr.wine and a few others that I pay for. I also pay Snort. And like some of this is like, I really like Snort. I use Snort really regularly. It's sort of phrased as like, are you a supporter or not? Instead of like, hey, this is a subscription, which I kind of don't like. I wish they would just be like, this is your subscription. You're going to pay this every month. And so I guess like, to me, it feels like a trick missed there. But yeah, like those are a bunch that I pay for.
I pay for DVMs, for data vending machines. Like, just to mess around with them, but it's like, yeah, it's like something I'm totally happy
like, what
to pay
do you
for.
like? Which one?
I like it how I can like use it to generate the images, like
Okay.
type, like, yeah, instead of paying like Stable Diffusion or whatever. Like, I'd rather just pay a DVM. And it's also just easier because I'm in Hong Kong, and most of the AI stuff is IP blocked. And then using a VPN is also kind of a bit flaky. Like, they're pretty good at detecting VPNs. So that means setting up your own like VPS to route through there, and it's just like, fuck off. I'll just use a DVM.
Wait, can I ask you who did your image for Pablo and their Gigi's podcast? Because that was awesome.
I did that just
it was
by hand.
Beautiful. Really?
Well, it's just, I just took their profile. No, there's nothing. No. I took their profile pictures and just cut it in half and put it together.
It was so cool. I liked it. And I love their session. They're going to be doing that Madeira thing for 2 months, which sounds fascinating. Really, really interesting.
It's going to be
proposal.
really cool. I think the applications are still open, I think.
Okay.
So like, yeah, if people are listening, especially people who are participating in the hackathon, like, if they don't know about sovereign engineering, they should go and check it out. It's going to be really fun.
Yeah, and I just saw somebody posting images of the hiking in Madeira, a video, and it was just spectacular. So we're going to go visit Pablo over there. But first, we're going to see each other in Tokyo, and we're looking forward to the projects that are going to be presenting. There is a moment on November 3rd where from 1 to 3 p.m. local time, people can pitch live if they want to, or at least submit a video and we can play it. So that'll be exciting. We'll be announcing winners that day as well. So A, if you're going to be there, say hi to us. And B, we're really looking forward to seeing the projects and teams that are going to make it to the finals, and we can share them with you then.
When was that pitch session that you just mentioned?
The session will be November 3rd, when we were going to be, if anybody wants to pitch, they can pitch live or submit a video that we can play that day. And that is the day that we hope to announce winners as well. So that is going to be exciting.
Cool. Sounds like fun.
So do you want to say anything final to our listeners, especially the hackathon participants, of how to build in public, or what, where they can find you to ask for help if needed? Please.
Yeah, best place to find me is on Nostr, JeffG. You'll find me pretty quickly. And yeah, I'm always happy to talk to teams about monetization, but also product. I've spent the last 10 years doing product and monetization stuff in a bunch of different startups. So it's an area I love to nerd out on.
Yeah, I just say build everything in public all the time. Don't hide anything. It doesn't matter. No one cares. Just do it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter.
Excellent advice. Thank you both for being here. We really appreciate it, and we are looking forward to the results. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.
Thanks. Bye.